So it's like 1 a.m. here. I am leaving for a flight in a couple of hours, but I really wanted to film this video before I left because these like 7 books genuinely changed my life. They changed the way that I see the world. They changed the way that I process information. I am so confident in the quality of these books that I know that if you read them, it will change your world as well. Like, it makes your world bigger. It makes you like realize more connections between the things that you see. These like are just genuinely high quality books that will make the place in your brain a better space. So yeah, without further ado, I want to dive into these books. Oh wait, I should probably talk about who I am. Hi, I'm Grace. I am a second year student at Harvard College studying computer science, neuroscience, and economics, and I just love reading. Hopefully you love reading as well, or you're looking for some book recommendations. But here are these 7 books that changed the way I see the world, and I hope it can do the same for you. The order that I'm going in from a recommendation from one of you last time is from least recommended to most recommended. So the first book that I have on this list is Storyworthy by Matthew Dicks. Wow, okay, so this book is about this storyteller who starts off as an everyday Joe like you and I, but he has like a pretty crazy upbringing, so he's just got like a ton of really great stories collected. By really great, I don't mean like these experiences are great. He's got a pretty tough childhood. His stories include like really bad car accidents and abusive relationships, but what makes this book life-changing is that he breaks down storytelling into a skill. So he tells these like 2 to 3 minute stories to you. After reading every one of these stories, I'm left in a state of like, wow, I feel like I just like watched a movie. But then he goes and he says, I know exactly which scene is in your head right now. It's this like 2-second snippet from this larger 2-minute movie. And every single time he does this, I'm like, oh my God, he's right. That's exactly the scene that I remember. How is he able to do that? It's because he's broken down storytelling into a like systemized formula almost. He's able to tell stories in a very genuine way, but in a powerful way because he knows what sticks with the audience. He teaches that to you in this book and basically breaks down what it means to be a good storyteller. That's not what made this book change my life though. What made this book change my life is a concept he calls life homework. So at the end of every day, he recommends writing down 2 to 3 sentences to capture what you did that day. As I reflected on my entries, I realized that I was remembering more of my life because of this reflection and consolidation process. And because of this, I was able to connect the dots in hindsight and see like stories in my life that I wouldn't have seen before. Basically, this life homework concept allows you to draw more dots in your life and see how they connect. So it's actually made my life richer by allowing me to remember more memories and, more importantly, see the connections between my memories. And I know that if you read Storyworthy, not only will you know how to tell better stories, but also see more stories in your own life. So I would highly recommend this book if you want to find more stories and gems in your own life while also learning how to be a powerful storyteller. The 6th book on my list is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. So this is another communication book, but it's coming from the perspective of negotiation. So Chris Voss is this super famous high stakes negotiations FBI dude. Basically, if you have a hostage situation, you want him in the room. He has a stellar track record of being able to diffuse very high stress hostage situations and minimize the cost of the situation by never splitting the difference. He never makes a compromise. For somebody who uses compromise as a crutch and often has trouble with confrontation, this book was incredibly helpful to learn like tangible tactics to use in a high stress confrontational situation. An example of one of these tactics is the power of no. Before, I had read a lot of advice on if you wanted somebody else to say yes to a plan that you had, get them in the habit of saying yes first, and then that last yes, the one that you need, will come more easily. But Chris Voss says this is exactly against human psychology. In fact, if you give somebody else the power of saying no, you make them feel like they're in control and they're much more likely to give you a yes down the road. So it's these small psychological techniques that he teaches you that are very practical. So it's really nice to have this toolkit in your back pocket to deal with these high stress situations, especially if you're like me, tend to be less confrontational. He also goes into a really cool idea about black swans, which are unknown unknowns that can pop up in high stress situations. And that's made a difference in the way that I approach difficult problems in my life. If there's a difficult question I need an answer to, now I always make sure to consider unknown unknowns as well, and to plan for situations that I can't plan for. Sounds a bit unintuitive, but this book really breaks down negotiations into a tangible art, and I think it's a really great learn if you have a personality similar to mine. Coming in at 5th place now is The Third Door by Alex Banayan. This book recommendation I actually got from another YouTuber, Ali Abdal. I'd highly recommend watching his videos as well. They're much more professional than mine, and he has some really terrific book recommendations. But this book basically taught me a mentality when approaching a difficult opportunity, and that's this nightclub metaphor. So to get into a nightclub, there are always 3 ways to get in. There's the first way that most people use, which is to line up at the front door. And sometimes this line is like wrapping between blocks, it's super long, and you have to wait forever to get in. You might not even get in. But this is the line that most people use. It's the one that's visible, it's the one that's marketed, that's easy to get into. It just takes a lot of time. So most people go here. Then there's like the second door for the celebrities, for the people with connections. There's a second door that the bouncer will let you in if you are a person of significance. And unfortunately, most people like us aren't born to have the second door rights. But these are the only 2 visible doors. But there is a third hidden door. There's always this other path where you could jump in through the window, go through the basement, befriend the kitchen staff, and like shimmy your way onto the dance floor. It's the not marketed, never trekked before path that you have to go out there and forge yourself. And this book, the reason why it stuck with me wasn't because it introduced this concept of the third door, but because it taught me the dangers of using the third door too much. We watch as our protagonist discovers this third door, and initially we're rooting for him to skip the line and go through that third door. But we also get a cautionary tale within this book because our protagonist genuinely uses that door too much. You get to see the snaky, ugly side of always going through the third door, and I think that was a really great way to balance this, realizing that a third door exists, but tastefully using it to your advantage without doing it in a snaky or like uncomfortable way. So if you want that balance of like a motivational book to get you to go on the unbeaten trail while also keeping in mind the values of being a good human being, I think this book does a great job at striking a tangible and realistic balance. All right, we're getting onto the books that like I genuinely cannot put into words because I love them so much. The 4th book now coming in is The Way of the Superior Man by David Dayton. Now, this book I say is definitely the most controversial one I have on this list. I would say only read this book if you are okay with having your values challenged. I just love reading books that I disagree with, the same way that I hate watching TV shows sometimes. In my opinion, it's so fun to dig into a book that is unapologetic and has strong opinions because it shows the author's confidence, given of course that the author has done significant research and the quality of the writing is good, which I think that this book falls into. Essentially, this book is a view on the author's opinion of feminine and masculine energy within a relationship, and his opinion on the role that each of these plays. They're very different from my values, but why this book was so effective and why it changed my life is because it is a very convincing argument that got me to challenge my values, discover new reasons why I believe in my values, while also processing a perspective that is very different from my own. I think it's always a great opportunity to see life through new shoes, and this book really puts you through that. The author has very convincing writing, and I think it gets you to ask a lot of difficult questions about what you value in a relationship. So if you want your values challenged, if you want to discover new things about yourself and ask existential questions about what you believe in and what your morals are, I would recommend reading The Way of the Superior Man, but only if you're up to the challenge. Coming up on my 3rd book of the year, man, this was such a hard decision to make because I genuinely love all 3 of these books equally, but that's not true. I have a favorite. So the 3rd book that I loved the most this year was Leonardo da Vinci by Walter Isaacson. So a fun fact about me with reading is I absolutely love biographies, but almost exclusively the ones that Walter Isaacson writes. He's got a couple of fantastic ones. He's got Steve Jobs, one recently from Jennifer Doudna, Benjamin Franklin, Albert Einstein. All of his biographies are absolutely phenomenal because he manages to make these legendary people into real humans in his book, and Leonardo da Vinci is no exception. I mean, this man single-handedly pioneered fields like painting, chiaroscuro, I can't say the word, but light and dark. He pioneered fields in dissection, in capturing anatomy and drawing, but also in inventing war machines and investigating astrology and mathematics. Isaac Walterson is able to capture this ephemeral man inside of a book and hone down on the characteristics that gave him the ability to make all of these realizations. And the one that really stuck with me is Leonardo da Vinci's insatiable curiosity, or I could say his like childlike curiosity. The best example I have of this is an excerpt from his notebook. He kept these meticulous notebooks of all of his inventions, but also all of his to-do lists. And his to-do lists are like nothing that I've ever seen before. This is an example. 1. Get the master of arithmetic to show you how to square a triangle. 2. Get a professor of medicine and law in Pavia named Messer Favio to show you about proportion. Get the Benedictine monastery to Milan to show you a medieval text on mechanics. Draw Milan and describe the tongue of a woodpecker. Describe the tongue of a woodpecker was on his to-do list. He kept these like meticulous lists of just questions that he wanted to answer, seemingly for no reason at all. And after reading this book, I was inspired, like maybe I could be like Leonardo da Vinci, yeah, sure, and like keep lists as well. So I like whenever a question would pop up, I'd write them down. And then fast forward like 12 months and I have lists of questions everywhere. They're at the back of every notebook, on my phone, on my computer, on my laptop. And every once in a while, when I get a spare chance, I'll go through these lists. For every 10 questions that I write down, I probably get to 8 of them, but that's 8 more than I would have gotten to like in the years before. It's changed the way that I approach the world because I now see questions as games. Whenever a new question pops up, instead of feeling like incompetent because I don't know it or fear because it's an unfamiliar territory, I see it almost like a little coin or a little gem that I'm collecting from a video game that I can record in my notebook or on my phone or on my laptop in my notes app to revisit later and discover a little bit more flavor in the world later. Approaching life with this sense of like curiosity and openness to discovery just makes the world around you so much more approachable, but also gives you the excuse to learn so much more about the things that you don't understand. So I think learning to approach life with the same like delightful curiosity and childlike questioning that Leonardo da Vinci displays, at least in the rendition of Leonardo da Vinci from Walter Isaacson, changed the way that I interact with the world, and it's made it a much more interesting place. Okay, so the book that has my number 2 spot is definitely the easiest read of all of these books. It's also the fastest read, so if you need something quick to get through, this is the book that I would recommend you take away, and that is the Almanack of Naval Ravikant. This book is actually a compilation of tweets from Naval Ravikant. Naval Ravikant is my vision of a modern day philosopher. He invented AngelList, which is this like software that people who are looking for angel investors will use. And he is also a very active angel investor. And the reason why he is so revered in like the tech startup space is because he very much values wealth creation as a skill as well as the pursuit of happiness. So in this book, he splits it into 2 main categories, which is how to pursue happiness and how to pursue wealth creation as a skill. And he not only gives a very approachable, solid, and like evidence-backed approach for creating wealth, but I think he gives some very thoughtful explanations on how happiness can be tangibly achieved. One of the ones that stuck with me the most was that you should always be playing long-term games. You always want to make relationships with long-term people and never make deals with like short-term people. What he defines as a long-term person is somebody that you would want to do business with in the long run. I'm using the word business here loosely. This could mean like business relationship or like a personal relationship or a friendship or whatnot. But you only want to forge relationships between people you want in your life in the long term. Never make deals with short-term people. Never make deals with people who are only mentally there for a short period of time, who only want to deal with you for a short period of time, because that only leads to like short-term thinking, which leads to like long-term harm. I think this is such great advice, not only for business practices, but also for emotional happiness, stability, and to suss out somebody else's character, as well as to forge new values for my own character. Since this book is so small and so jam-packed with amazing life philosophy, but also business advice, it has to take the number 2 spot on my list. So that brings me to the number 1 spot, which is my favorite nonfiction book of 2022, and definitely the one that changed the way that I view the world the most. And that is How We Got to Now, 6 Inventions That Shaped the Modern World. The author's name is Steven Johnson, and man, this book was phenomenal. It's exactly what the title implies. It goes through 6 inventions that have shaped the modern world, but in the most unconventional way. So for instance, one of the inventions was glass, and it takes us on a journey on how glass was initially used to create cups and windows, but then was later transformed to create eyeglasses and microscopes and telescopes, and now is the backbone of the internet with fiber optic cables. The main takeaways from this book are: number 1, inventions don't happen from lonely, brilliant creators. They happen because society is ready to accept them. Like something like the eyeglass would never have come along without typewriters first. Typewriters allowed humans to realize that, hey, some people's eyesight is better than others. Some people's eyesight degenerate. And more importantly, it gave us the need to have good eyesight. And only when that was put in place did we have the need for glasses, and therefore glasses could be invented. So it gives a much more, I think, accurate description of how inventions come about. And importantly, that inventions are convergent evolution. Oftentimes the same invention will happen in multiple locations with people who are completely independent of each other, because technology has gotten to a point where society is ready to accept this new invention. It's never the other way around. You can't force an invention onto a society that's not ready for it. So I think that was a huge takeaway. And the other amazing thing was this book is able to create this like almost cobweb of relationships between inventions that seem so seemingly unrelated to each other. I mean, another example is the invention of chlorine and how that's tied with women's fashion. Initially, before chlorine was invented, pools weren't a thing because large bodies of water would harbor too much bacteria. But once chlorine was invented, we could disinfect large bodies of water, and suddenly pools became a thing for the rich people. And so when women wanted to go in swimming pools, obviously their swimsuits had to be invented. And initially it took somewhere around 20 yards of fabric to create a woman's swimsuit. But over the years, as more and more people started wearing swimsuits and designers started to take their creative liberties on swimsuits, these swimsuits became smaller and smaller. And the trickle-down effects meant that women's fashion outside of swimwear also became socially acceptable to show more skin. Now, women's swimsuits take less than a yard of fabric to make, and this would never have been possible if pools weren't made possible by chlorine in the first place. I would have never known that this connection existed between chlorine and what women can acceptably wear in society, but this book drew those connections for me, and there are so many more that I can't wait for you to discover if you decide to pick it up. So How We Got to Now is definitely taking the #1 spot on my list for this year, and I hope it will blow your mind like it did with mine, except just not literary. So that wraps it up. These are the 7 best books of 2022 that have changed the way that I see the world, and I hope it will do the same with yours. Please leave any recommendations you have in the description down below. I can't wait to make more videos. I'm thinking the next one might be books that taught me more than Harvard, or some other clickbaity title like that. But yeah, let me know what you want to see more of, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!